I had this goal. I wanted my kids to be independent, said Esther Wojcicki. So today we're going to talk with Esther, who is a mom of three very successful children. So we've got Susan, who's the CEO of YouTube, Anne, who's the co-founder and CEO of 23andMe, and then Janet, who's an anthropologist and associate professor of pediatrics at the University of California at San Francisco. Esther is also a star teacher, known by her loving high school students mainly as Woj. She's recently retired, and that's after 4 decades of award-winning teaching experience, and that's in Palo Alto, California, which, for those who don't know, is home to some super big tech giants such as the late Steve Jobs, and Esther actually taught his daughter. So she's got quite an impressive background, to say the least. Esther also wrote a book called How to Raise Successful People, which we will talk a bunch about. And some listeners might be interested to know that she is a huge fan of Montessori, which I learned in talking with her. Overall, she is a fascinating lady. And it was really a personal pleasure for me to sit down with someone who just has so much life experience. Like she's well into her 70s, and she has real skin in the game. I mean, I think she has like 10 grandchildren. And of course, there's, over the years, thousands of students. So I'm hoping you will enjoy the conversation as much as I had during it. So a quick note before hopping in, I won't be doing any closing remarks after our discussion. So if later you want to learn more about Esther and her work, you can visit her current project, which is called, it's Tract. And this is a peer-to-peer learning among children and adolescents. It's kind of an online platform. You can find that at woj.tract.app. And that's woj.tract.app. All right. And you can always reach me, and I'm Jesse McCarthy at montessorieducation.com. All right. We will do our quick overall podcast intro first, and then get straight to the conversation with Esther, or as I now kind of refer to her, because she's quite a spirited lady, as a wild Woj. All right. The educator Dr. Maria Montessori once said,
"The child developing harmoniously and the adult improving himself at his side make a very exciting and attractive picture."
Welcome to Montessori Education with me, Jesse McCarthy, where we talk raising children and educating students while bettering ourselves right alongside them. All right, Esther, thank you so much for coming on today. I'm glad to have you here.
I'm very excited to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
So,
an opportunity.
Yeah. And I'm happy to have the opportunity to have you on. So this is very cool. So I thought, just jumping right in here, if somebody came up to you and said one thing, you're like the master raising successful children, you've helped all these students throughout your life, what would be one thing, if you could only do one thing or one thing to focus on, what would that be?
Are we confining that to the classroom, or would that be in your home?
Life. Yeah, life, classroom, at home. If it's something different for each of those, feel free to do that. But I just thought, is there some one thing that jumps out?
I think the one thing, if I were to do one thing, it would be to make all parents worldwide aware of how important it is to take really good care of their children starting at birth to 10. And really traumatic experiences happen early in life, and you cannot get rid of them. And parents forget, or maybe they don't know, that these really unpleasant or, traumatic experiences, their theory is, they'll just forget it. They won't remember, but they do. So if I could do one thing, it would be to help all parents be better parents.
And it's interesting coming from you, given that your background is mainly in high school with students. I mean, you raised 3 children, you have 10 grandchildren, but your background is in high school. So how do you balance that, given that you spent so much time with the older children, and now you've come to believe that, man, you got to really focus on the younger years? Like, how do you make sense of that?
Well, if I had a child in high school that had problem, I could look back at their record going all the way back to kindergarten, and I could see that they entered kindergarten with problems. And so I saw that the impact of the early years is more important than we are giving it credit for.
Yeah.
And there are countries in the world where they allow preschool to start at the age of 2 or 3 or things like that. And what that does is it alleviates a lot of the conflict because parents, they have to work, they have a lot of other obligations, and if they have to take care of their kids and they're not in a very good mood and things aren't going the way they,
Mm.
so it can be very difficult. But if a child goes to a preschool where they're focused on their intellectual ability development and their social skills, then it makes a big difference. And those kids will come out with better skills for life is basically what it's all about.
I,
And
I, I love it that you're starting out and basically promoting Montessori, Esther. This is brilliant. This.
well, I am promoting Montessori. So I love Montessori. And I think Montessori she had it right. She was very clever, and empowering young kids is really the most important thing that we can do. And what I've done in high school, actually also in middle school, is sort of Montessori in school for older
Yeah.
kids, because I don't want to do it for them. I want to be there to help them do it and empower them. And that's what Montessori is all about, helping your kids be independent, teaching them to do a lot of things themselves. And while my children went to a school in Palo Alto called Bing Nursery School, they actually did a lot of Montessori training at home because I loved Montessori stuff. So I just bought the stuff and we'll do it at home. Why not?
Yeah. And, in reading your book, before knowing, if you had any connection with Montessori or anything like that, it's so clear that you were raising your children in a quote Montessori way, but it doesn't have to have this name Montessori. It's just that idea of allowing your children some independence or helping them to develop independence, right?
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's the key. And so when my daughter Susan set up the daycare program in the nursery schools and for Google employees, the Google daycare, she used a lot of the Montessori method and also the Reggio Emilio
Yeah.
method, which is really, it's sort of it's similar. They have a few changes, but basically the philosophy is the same. Empowering kids, let them make choices, give them an opportunity to do what they want. And um, and so that's what I would do for the whole world. I really wish we could do that.
Yeah. I don't think I asked you because we spoke, I don't know how long ago it was when we spoke, but did given that your daughter is with YouTube and so forth, that Sergey Brin and Larry Page are both Montessori children?
Yes, I
You knew
know.
that. Okay. I didn't know if you knew that or
Now,
not.
for a long time, not only that, Sergey was always telling me how high school, the way it's conceptualized in the United States in general, is a waste of time. And he was always telling me the kids, they need to have real world experiences. They need to learn what is going on in the world, and this theoretical stuff just doesn't work. And he always was a big supporter of my program and the fact that it's real world and the journalism is real world
So why
journalism.
don't you talk a little bit about that? So what do you feel that you were doing? Now I know that you're doing some unique stuff from reading your work and researching you, but can you share with the audience what do you think is unique about what you were doing in high school with your students, journalism or life, whatever approach, versus what's generally going on in most high schools?
So we can talk just a little bit about what generally goes on in most high schools, and that is students sit in classes and the teacher talks. It's a lecture and you take notes, and then you do a test. They'll have a test on whatever day of the week they decide to have a test. And most of the learning is theoretical. It's not applied. And so recently schools have changed that to some degree and had more peer-to-peer learning, which they call applied, but usually it's not real world because they give you choice A, B, C, and you pick choice A, B, C, and that's not real world. So what I did that was really different is that in journalism, journalists are responsible for going out and trying to find out what happened yesterday and try to warn people about things that might be dangerous or exciting things that happened and telling the world about it and writing up about it. So I applied that to my classes. In other words, the textbook was the world. The textbook is going out and finding that information, how to find information first person, how to take that information and figure out what's most important. And then also when technology caught up, because I first started in 1984, there were no computers. So when technology caught up, then of course I taught them how to use the web to get information to do, interviews online. We were doing Zoom interviews before the crisis, before the pandemic.
Mm.
And that basically what I was doing is giving them the whole world to find out information about. And then they could write it up. But I taught them how to write it up. So I trusted them. I gave them a tremendous amount of trust. I respected their ideas because they came up with some really wacky ideas. I can tell you, teenagers. I gave them a ton of independence. And so the program, the thing that was the most unique about the program is that I put students in charge of running it. So I was really the coach on the side. The class was usually 70 students, between 60 and 75 students in one class. And there were 5 to 6 editors, and they were the peer group, and they controlled everything. So what I was trying to do is teach them how to collaborate with their peers on a project that mattered. And we published every 3 weeks. It was a 24 to 28 full-size newspaper, the size of the New York Times. And they were in charge. The and so it was real world learning because it had to look real world. We were entering this competition, Columbia Scholastic Press Association, which we won, I don't know, 25 years running, gold crowns or silver crowns for that's the top of the nation. And the kids knew, I knew, and whenever they went off course, I would basically coach them. I would say, this is how it should have been done. I never embarrassed any of them in front of the class, never. That was always one of my mantras. And because that they always made mistakes, because that's school is a place where you're supposed to make mistakes.
Yes.
And so my my policy was revise, do it again, do it again, do it again. So grading was never an issue. The thing was, every kid came into class, you're getting an A. You're getting an A because you're going to revise until it's A quality.
Mm.
And so the grade pressure was always off, and kids loved it. And the program grew from 20 kids in 1984 to over 700 last June of 2020.
So pulling out a few things from there that kind of jump at me. One is the real world aspect of it. Now, some people say, well, yeah, well, they're high school kids, so now they can do real things. But where do you think is the fear of in school? And it's obviously not just high school, it goes all the way down to the earliest grades, of allowing children to do real world things as opposed to just sitting in chairs indoors, not thinking outside of it. Like where is that coming from? What's going on? What do you think?
Well, the tests are great. The tests are really controlling the system.
Hmm.
So the teachers teach to the test. My theory has always been that if kids are engaged and doing things like writing well and reading well, then the test scores will take care of themselves. And that's been true because my students have some kids started with very few skills and then went to scores that were like above 90, 99%, the top scores. And it was because they had to use the punctuation, the grammar, they had to use everything. They had to use their thinking skills. They had to do it all because when you're writing a news story, the main thing you do in news is you sort through all the information you've got and figure out what's most important. That is critical thinking. Most people don't do that. Most people do it chronologically. They're like, first this happened, then this happened, then that happened. It's like, no, I want to
Yeah.
know what is the most important thing. So I taught them how to do that. And when I say trust, boy, I really trusted them because in the state of California, the person who gets sued if there's libel is the teacher.
Really, even if the students write something, you get.
What I get sued.
I did not know that. That's awesome.
So I just want you to know that in all those years, those kids took care of me. They
Yeah.
basically, they made sure they double checked their facts. They did whatever they needed to do to
Yeah.
make sure it was okay. Oh, and
Yeah.
it wasn't, so it started with one newspaper, the Campanile, and it grew to about 8 other magazines. We have television, we had podcasting, we have online, we had everything. I thought well, what happened is the program got too big, so I had to think of alternatives for them to be part of. And
Mhm.
so I started additional publications. I started a magazine in 2000. Every 2 years, I started additional magazines. That was a news magazine, an arts and entertainment magazine, sports magazine, um, foreign affairs magazine, kids, and then they came up with their own ideas for what other kind of magazines they wanted.
So
Uh,
I wonder in allowing, because you just, there's a sense of you, and particularly when you're reading your work, it's clear that you have a comfort with letting go. Like there's a sense in which yeah, they're going to mess up or they're going to do things, but it's all going to be all right in the end. And I feel that that's lacking in a lot of parents and definitely in a lot of teachers, this feeling that I can, I have trust that these children can actually achieve some pretty tremendous things. And yeah, they'll mess up, but we all mess up. So why do you think that trust or that respect is lacking in so many of us adults when we're working with children, whether as parents or teachers or anything really in the world?
because I think the system is based on fear of mistakes.
Hmm.
It's fear of the teacher, fear of mistakes, fear of looking silly, fear of not doing the right thing. There's a lot of fear out there. And so what I try to instill in my students is that your reaction to life is what controls everything. There's a lot of bad things happening in life. Right now we have the pandemic. Your reaction to the pandemic is where your power lies. If you get really stressed, if you can't cope, it's your reaction. So I tried to help my students understand that they could make it or break it, and they always had the opportunity to revise. I never published anything until we all thought it was okay. And this cycle ran on a 3-week cycle. So let me tell you, it was really fast. You can imagine.
Right.
First week story ideas, second week writing, third week publication. And I taught the Adobe Creative Suite. Just check out how to use the Adobe Creative Suite. It's complicated. It's not a simple program. I did it because I wanted to prepare them for the real world. The whole world is using Adobe. So why would I want to have them use something that is, not as good as what the real
Mm.
world's using? So they could actually go out and get jobs. And a lot of the kids in college got jobs working as for a lot of different companies doing newsletters or just any kind of social stuff on the web because they had all that Adobe training.
Yeah. There does
So
seem to, there seems to be, I remember this growing up too, because I grew up in Southern California, but and I mean, I think this is across the country and even the world, but there's a phoniness about education where it's like you do these phony things for your teacher, she checks off, and then you move on. And I always felt like we're not doing real work. Like, we're doing some imitation of work, so there's something about the way that you're presenting this as like, no, these children are creating something real for the world, and the world is going to judge it. The world is going to judge it. So I don't know if that's been a big, thing throughout your experience and so forth.
well, so like I said, first of all, the teachers in their defense, a lot of them are told what to do. It's
Mhm.
scripted education. And so Pearson and McGraw-Hill, they have textbooks where they tell the teacher exactly what to teach on every day of the school year. And that's because there's lack of trust there. And they want to make sure the teacher is teaching what the school board has dictated. So it is lack of trust. And so that results in no creativity, a lot of memorization. And the teacher, I kind of equate the teacher in many instances as just like a waitress in a restaurant. They're not cooking the dinner, they're serving it. Sorry to say this, but the school board is the cook. They're in charge of the recipe, and the teacher is delivering whatever the school board has cooked up.
Yeah,
And
Esther, I feel like you're trying to you're making it so, oh, the teachers, it's not really their fault, it's this, but it's probably even more the teachers like, what the hell, you calling me a server now? This is what my job is.
oh, but so
I
I
know
just
what you're saying.
they're constrained. They're constrained by all the rules that the school board puts
Yeah.
down.
Yep.
Teachers want to be creative. They want to do the best they can do, but there's all these constraints out there. And
Yeah.
so what happened with me is that my entire battle, I should just tell you, was a battle from the time I was hired all the way through, because I was challenging the system. And a lot of people do not challenge the system. And the reason they don't challenge the system is because they're worried about their job security.
Mhm.
And so I was married. My husband didn't make a lot of money, but he was a Stanford professor. So he made enough money so I wasn't going to starve. So I was willing to challenge the system. If I got fired, it was like, okay, well, I'll do something else.
Yeah.
But most teachers are not in that position. So I decided, I wanted, for my students, I wanted a program that I wish I would have had. I wanted to teach them the way I wish I would have been taught.
Yeah.
And so I gave them a lot of control. I remember I got into a lot of problems with the administration because they were always saying those kids are out of control. And not only that, they would never want to leave. What are you doing there in that room? Why do they want to stay forever? What's going on?
Yeah.
And then, I didn't want them to be hungry. So of course I made sure they had food.
Mhm.
And that the original food started out, I was just buying pizza for them. Okay, you guys can have pizza. And that grew into a massive thing where I brought the parents in, they were helping supply dinners for the kids. And what that did is it made into a huge community, because then the kids
Yeah.
saw their parents as part of the community, and the parents saw other parents, and they all worked together. And so you can imagine I had like 60 or 70 teenagers and their parents there, and
Mm.
nobody wanted to go home.
Yeah, it sounds exciting.
It was so exciting. So the CEO of this little company that I started recently called Tract.app, TRACT.app. His name is Ari Memar. He was my student. And a lot of the people in this company were my former students.
I love it.
And what is funny is he remembers, of course, staying for a really long time.
Mm.
They all stayed till 9 or 10. I had to ask them to please go home. And so it's a very different program. And then also, I was really I had a good time. I loved being with them. So I actually I did a trip to New York City once a year. And I took 52 kids to New York City for a week. So the question is like, why 52? What the answer is 52. That's the number of people you can put in one bus.
Is that 52 people? You must have one of those big yellow buses.
No, it wasn't a yellow. I rented one of those buses and they only held 52. So that was it. So I maxed out. But it was, again, a real world experience.
Yeah.
Learning what it's like to live in New York City, going
Yeah.
to the publications in New York City. Anyway, so I've been really interested in real world my whole life.
Yeah. And, there's the real world element, and then you kind of got a little bit into the community element, and, even involving parents, which, in the book, you talk a great deal. I know you were a teacher, but the focus on parents and raising children at home. And it just sounds like you recognize the kind of the whole of all of this. You can't just have one part or else it's going to fall. Like, if you've got, if it's a mess at home or if it's a mess at school, like we need a somewhat of an integration. So I'm curious, when you talk about the home life, or when you raise the home life as being significant, what at home do you see as being important for parents? And maybe we're having some challenges today that parents could do better with. And I mean, you're a parent yourself, you went through all of this, you can speak on it, but where are some of the areas that parents can improve or even do better at where they're at now?
So I think As a parent, first of all, I understand it's a challenge because you have to control this little person and you have to do your work and you have to keep the house up and there's a lot of things going on. But one of the most important things I think for parents is to realize that they model the behavior for their kids. So when they are very stressed, then their kids become stressed. And so it's a cycle. They're stressed and the kids are stressed and their husband is stressed, their wife is stressed, and it's like one thing after another. And so I guess I've been in a situation growing up. If you read my book, you'll see that I had somewhat of a very difficult childhood. Um, I realized that the power was in me and how I responded to what was happening in the world. And so that's, I think, a really important thing for everybody to remember. So I have those 10 grandchildren, and the question is, how have they done in this pandemic? And most of them, well, I say that not only most, all of them have done really well because they've had this attitude of, well, now that I don't have to go to school, let's see some of the other things that I can do.
Yeah.
I can practice basketball, I can play tennis, I can do other things. Okay, I might be missing out on memorizing this or that, but I'm going to work on some of the other skills
Hmm.
that I could have. Um, I mean, they have done remarkably well, and they've learned how to adapt to the online programs. I can just say it hasn't been easy, but they've done it. And so some of them are in private schools and some of them are in public schools, and it's been equal in terms of online schooling.
Hmm.
And so that's what I'd like to tell parents. They're all worried about what they call the learning loss. It's the pandemic learning loss.
Hmm.
And I think we need to change that. This has been an opportunity to learn other things.
Yeah, I'm happy you raised that. I'm curious about this because when early on in the pandemic, so my wife's a 3 to 6 Montessori teacher, and it was interesting because we moved towards this online because we had to in the beginning, right? That was just the necessity of the times. We have to adapt. But I think in many schools there was this desire to like recreate what was happening already that was crappy education in the classroom where teachers are just yapping, and let's just recreate this, over Zoom calls. And I just remember, in Montessori, trying to come up with creative things that at home children could do these practical, real world things as opposed to just talking to them through the Zoom. So I'm happy you raised that because it kicks into something I wanted to discuss with you is that I find that in some of our modern schools, I think kids are actually worse off than if they were like on a farm learning how to farm alongside their grandparent or so forth. So, and I'm just curious about this because there's a lot of talk about, I'm moving to like say wealthy children versus poorer children. And poorer children have it worse off because they don't have what the wealthy have access to. And from my experience, I found that sometimes the wealthy people are actually in a worse off place, the children, because they're not actually doing anything of real value. Like poor children have to help their families shop. Or if
Right.
they're really poor, they're living on a farm. I know I've met some people in different countries in Africa that say, listen, I had a great childhood. I was working alongside my parents on the farm. And they've gained this confidence. So I'm curious, I know it might be a little radical, but what's your take on maybe rich kids being at a loss here because of everything they're given in life?
Um, I think that rich kids are at a disadvantage. Kids that are from wealthier families
Yeah.
are in some ways deprived of real world experiences because they're so overprotected by their parents that they're not given an opportunity to actually do things.
Like real
Whereas
things. Yes.
real things. So I'm working with a group in Guatemala called Boys Hope, Girls Hope, and it's run by one of my former students. They're everywhere. And it's a great nonprofit, and she's doing amazing work.
Mhm.
And I did a keynote for them in which I said, your kids there in Guatemala could teach a lot of important skills to the wealthier kids here in America,
Yes.
because they know how to take care of themselves. They're doing a lot of practical things at home, on the farm, going shopping. These kids are 10 and 11 years old, and they have incredible ability to figure out how life works and to be supportive for those parents.
Yeah.
And I think that what happens as kids grow up in families where they're given a lot of wealth, basically, people do things for them. Someone comes in, makes their bed, somebody makes lunch or dinner, somebody drives them somewhere. So I see around my area here in Palo Alto a lot of kids who don't even want to get a driver's license at the age of 16. It's like, are you
Wait,
kidding?
why? Because somebody will drive them around, or?
Because somebody will drive them
Oh
around.
my God.
Or, and the other thing was like, oh, I can just take Uber. I don't ever need to have a car. I mean, I remember when I was growing up in Los Angeles, I mean, I got my driver's license the morning of my
Oh
16th
yeah.
birthday.
I think most people are like dying to get their driver's license, right?
It was freedom. You know, I,
Yes.
I could go
Yes.
somewhere, even in my old rattle trap car. I could, I, and also I became very good at car mechanics because it
Yeah.
broke down all the time. So,
Esther, when you say this, because I think what happens, and I've heard this from wealthy parents, and I mean, it's understandable from this mindset, but it's like, in Montessori, children might be washing tables, and I literally heard this from a comedian who pulled his child out of Montessori because somebody will be washing the tables for my daughter. Why would I have her being taught? And so in some ways, there's a practical, like, hey, maybe somebody will do your groceries for you or something. But what they're lacking or what they're not seeing is what the self-esteem that develops when you can take care of yourself. So you
that's
talk some of this in your book. Can you talk a little bit about how important self-esteem is in your view and what it is really?
also self-esteem is probably the most important thing you can give your child. That's number one, because when you feel good about yourself and you feel that you can tackle the problems facing you in the world, you're much better off. And I have that acronym in my book, TRIC.
Mhm.
And TRIC stands for trust, respect, independence, collaboration, and kindness. And the first thing I say to parents is you need to build trust with your child. Trust them to do some things, tie their own shoelaces, make their own peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Why do you do this? It's not because you can't do it for them faster or better. It's because you're building trust. They're beginning to trust themselves and respect themselves. It is the number one, it's self-esteem. And if you spend $10,000 and go to a Tony Robbins weekend, you will realize that the main thing that Tony Robbins does for that $10,000, which I'm, by the way, giving it to you for free now, is teach you to believe in yourself, have self-esteem. That's number one. Get rid of all those tapes playing in your head about how bad you are at doing this or bad you are at doing that, that you learned when you were little.
Yeah, yourself.
You're,
Yeah, I'm gonna have to send this to Tony Robbins and see if he has a comeback for you,
yeah,
Esther.
could you please?
So
Because that's it.
so on a to kind of get a little deeper here and get serious with this self-esteem point, because you raise it and you talk about in the book, and I think it's so important. I heard a quote once: a child's independence is too big a risk for the shaky balance of some parents. So what I'm curious with here is, you just mentioned that a little bit. We've got our own baggage that we come with as adults. So when we say, well, we should help children to have more independence, but we ourselves are lacking some of these things, whether as parents or teachers, how do you overcome that? How do you work on that so that you can allow your children some independence, so you can trust your children a little bit more? What's your take on that?
Well, that's the first person you have to work on is yourself, honestly. And that was what I realized when I first had my children, my daughters, is that I needed to be the kind of parent I wished I would have had. So I grew up in a family where the motto was "Spare the rod, spoil the child." My father was he grew up in Russia, and the way that they taught children there was basically hitting them all the time. So I grew up in an environment where I was hit all the time. Actually, he was hit by rods. I was hit by a belt. He used to take off his belt and whack me nonstop. And the only time he stopped, I'm 5'10". When I, at the age of 13, grew to be 5'10", he was 5'8". He stopped.
Wow.
And so I did not want to have that kind of an experience for my daughters.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, what do I want them to do? I want them to be as independent and think for themselves as early as possible. And so that was my goal. And I was like, I'm never going to hit them ever. And so that's how I started out. And that's when I ended up teaching my children first how to swim very early, because we had a swimming pool and I didn't want any accidents. So Susan was probably the latest one, because I was pregnant with Janet at the time. And so she was about 1.5 or 2 when she learned to swim. But Janet, because they were 18 months apart, I wanted to make sure Janet, who was very physical, didn't run into any problems. She learned to swim at 12 months. She was just a year. And people would say this is impossible. But, if you want to do it, you can do it.
Yeah.
And that's basically what I did. And then with Anne, I did the same thing, because of course there were 3 of them. So that was the first one. I taught them also not how to read, but I taught them all the letters of the alphabet.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would show them what the street sign said. So in case you ever got lost, this is what the street sign said. This is how to read stop sign. This is the street we live on. At the age of 3, they could tell you by the name of the street how to get from one place to another.
Wow.
And it was because I had this goal. I wanted them to be independent. That's where the whole Montessori thing came in, because then I realized, they can also learn to tie their shoes, put their clothes on, cook, clean the table. They were doing all these things. When Susan was 5, we moved to Switzerland. She had to learn a new language, French. She went to a new school. She had a new sister. We lived out in the country in the midst of all these cows. She had already had so much independence training that when one of her friends, who she had met at the school 6 months out, I think we arrived in September, it was in the spring. So she had been there about 6 months, invited her to go to the Swiss Alps for a week with them, speaking nothing besides French. She went. She was 5 years old.
Wow.
And so, but she attacked the language with the same idea. I can do it.
Yeah.
She learned to speak French. She learned at the same time that she was learning to speak English, read in English. Her attitude, because of her early training, was, yeah, I can do it.
Yeah, I
Well,
can handle
I didn't
this.
do it right the first time, but I can do it. And Janet they all had the same attitude of, maybe I believe in myself.
Yeah.
Some people are a little slower at doing it, and some people are faster. And so it doesn't matter. I'm not measuring how fast it takes you to do it. I'm measuring, basically, it's you that are measuring. Can you do it, and do you want to do
For
it
yourself.
for
Yeah, so
yourself?
so it sounds like, as a parent, even if at times it might be challenging to come up with a goal or a plan. This is what I'd want for my child. I don't want it to be like XYZ. This is what I want. And then just stick to it when in any particular case.
That's right. Stick to it. Don't get discouraged by how long it takes them. And one of the things parents get discouraged by is like how long it takes their child to be toilet trained. It's like, it's not a race. It's not a competition.
Yeah.
Some kids are toilet trained at 18 months, and some kids are toilet trained at 3.5.
Yeah.
And no one it doesn't matter, right? You never ask somebody when you meet them the first time, so how old were you when you were toilet
Yeah,
trained?
exactly. No, and I think that's this, and it's interesting because in Montessori, the whole idea was to have this, like, allow your child to be a child, help them be independent. But I think some of it's becoming now more of a competition because, in Montessori, children should be, potty trained early. So now it's like, oh, I need to get them earlier and earlier. And then it becomes a stressful thing as opposed to a kind of a joyous development of the child.
Right. Well, no kid likes to be stuck with diapers, and they will toilet train themselves
Yeah.
eventually. But I mean, the other thing is what I'm just reason I'm saying this is I think it's best if parents could just relax and realize it's a process and they're going to go through it and it'll happen and you don't need to worry.
Yeah. I
And
think that might be the biggest. I mean, from my experience, I think that's the biggest challenge because, the emotions that come up from what I've seen and I experienced as a teacher, two of the biggest, particularly for parents, is anxiety over, am I doing things right? And then guilt when I feel like I've done something wrong. So those are heavy, right? So
it's
how did
really
you,
heavy.
did you experience those as a parent, or you're kind of the rock star parent, but did you experience those two, anxiety and guilt?
Well, of course, everybody experiences anxiety and guilt. Gee, I'm sorry I didn't do this. I should have done it with them. And I can think of a lot of things that I can wish I would have done more of or less of. But overall, I try to do things that matter to them. I could see that they were thriving, and that's what mattered. Um, you know, I mean, I give this example in my book. Actually, I'm sitting in this room that was Susan's room. And when she was 6, we had just come back, or 6.5, we came back from Switzerland. Um, she wanted to redecorate her room. 6, okay, fine. She wanted a rug for her room. It's
I
like,
remember that.
okay, we'll go to the rug store, pick out a rug. Anyway, if you say to your kid, you're going to have the choice to do it, you want to give them the choice.
Yeah.
It never occurred to me she's going to pick hot pink shag, but that's what she picked. And she lived with it. I'm not kidding. She must have been 12 or 13 before that rug. She finally decided maybe she didn't want it anymore. But she was thrilled, and then she decorated her room the way she wanted.
Yeah.
Janet did the same thing. They all did it. And, so it wouldn't belong in a magazine, Better Homes and Gardens or something, or some kind, but, it didn't matter. It mattered to
Yeah.
her. That was the most important thing of all.
And I think you're just using this example again. It's that connection back to independence where you said, I want my children to be independent. And I think I like what you're saying because you have to overcome the anxiety of, well, I don't know what they're going to pick. And then when they pick pink and you can't stand it yourself, you have to say, it's important. You have to
That's
just take a breathe.
right. But there are always things, I wish I would have, given her more opportunities with musical instruments. I gave her a little bit and I didn't give her a lot. Um, and and also we had a French tutor that came in after they came back from France. I wanted to make sure they didn't lose their French. And this woman was really terrible. And I just should have fired her and I didn't do it. And the kids kept telling me, oh, Mom, she's awful. And I should have just done it. So there's always these
Yeah.
regrets.
You know,
I mean, they still speak French, thank God, but whatever.
and the trust I think you have in children generally, like that might have been a moment where you're like, well, I got to make decisions as a parent and it might have been the wrong one, but you tend, from reading you, from speaking, you tend to have such a trust. And one example jumps out from your book. It was, I don't know if a child had stolen cookies or he came back late to class and said he was, sick. Do you remember this? And
Yeah.
can you share that? Because and just to set this up, I want to say that we tend to be very harsh on children. And this really was a meaningful, little story you told. So just having trust and respect for children. So can you talk about that that story?
Yeah. So a kid came late to class, and they, frequently I would always say, you had some kind of an important thing. It was more important than being on time. Okay, I'm not going to question you. But this kid was coming late to class repeatedly. And then I was like, well, so, why are you late to class all the time? What's going on? And so then I found out that he was going across the street to the shopping mall there and buying cookies. And so I was like, oh my God. And he didn't tell me the truth. So, you had to have a one-to-one with this kid and talk about the whole thing and what was happening. And so I decided that what he was going to do, because he was not telling the truth and creating problems. And, I would do a lot of stuff at the beginning of class, and I wanted to make sure that everybody was there, and he was missing it. So I was like, okay, now you have to buy cookies for every single person in the class, every kid. And he was like, oh, and I was like, well, that's what happens, So every time anybody's late like that, that's the penalty, buying cookies for the whole class. So, I mean, it really worked. First of all, he never was late again. He bought very good cookies, but then nobody was late because no one wanted to be in this position of buying cookies for the whole class. But, I never sent a kid to the main office.
Yeah.
I always dealt with it myself. And
I,
it was very important because it's between the student and the teacher, and
yeah.
not between the student, the main office, and the teacher.
That's I think what I took from the story and others in the book is you mentioned fear before, and I feel that children around you, whether young children, adolescents, I just have to get the sense that there was no fear, that if I messed up, I can raise it with my teacher, and she's going to talk with me. Yeah, she's not going to let me off the hook and be like, oh, don't worry, but there might be a consequence, but she's not going to like just be rude towards me, that type of thing. So
Right. I didn't ever hold grudges, ever. And I told the kids also, and that's one of the reasons that the sense of community always built up, because I said, we all make mistakes, and you don't want to hold a grudge, because the person holding the grudge is the one, they've got anger, and anger
Yes.
burns. It hurts the person who holds the anger, and it also ruins the sense of collaboration and community. So I never did. And, kids, they were kids, right? So they did things like kids do, so I have this 2-story building, and it's got an open area at the top. And then, one day I discovered that some of the boys, of course, their boys are very creative here, were throwing pillows from the top story onto the girls, of course. So, this is dangerous, you guys. You could hit somebody the wrong way. It could be anyway.
With a pillow, Esther.
but a pillow going in a lump. It was
Distant.
It was hilarious, but of course we had to stop it. But so the consequences were appropriate, and they didn't do it. But there were a lot. Every day there was something, that, and you just want to make sure that it's course correction, but it isn't harsh course correction.
Yeah.
It's understanding that we all make mistakes, and there's no grudge, and that we're going to make amends if there's something that you do that is a problem. And it worked like a charm. And I think that's one of the main reasons why kids come back to me years later. And many of my students that are coming back are older than you. They're in their 40s.
Yeah, you've been in this for a long time.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I think it's awesome what you've done, the work that you're doing now, and I love you have your acronym, but the real thing for me is that trust, that respect, and then as you're focusing on, there's no reason to be in fear of the world, of ourselves, of making mistakes. We get back up and we keep going. And you just seem like that type of person in your soul. So you're modeling that, is from what I've gathered. And I think that's at the core.
That's
So
exactly right. You just keep going no matter what happens. Um, you have to make accommodations because that's life. And
yeah.
there's nobody that's going to come in there and do it for you. And that's one of the problems, I think, in kids that have too much,
Mhm.
that they're waiting for someone to come in and do it
Do
for
it
them.
for them. Yeah.
And there is nobody that's going to do it for
Yeah. There's
them.
nobody coming.
No, there's no one coming. You have
Yeah.
to do it yourself. And that's why Montessori teaches kids to be independent and have self-confidence. And the self-esteem is the key.
I love it, Esther. I didn't want to push Montessori on this episode, but here's Esther, the person promoting Montessori. I love it. So thank you.
So happy. Yes, I love Montessori.
Nice. Well,
Maria Montessori was amazing.
so I think let's jump off unless you have something that you want to share at the end here that we haven't covered. Is there anything?
No, I think you did a great job. I want you to continue doing it and continue helping parents and promoting Montessori, because I think all kids everywhere should be doing it 0 to 5 at least minimum,
Yeah.
and maybe 5 to 8, 5 to 10, or if they're really lucky in high school also.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Esther. Thank you again for coming on. I appreciate your comments there. So
Great. Well, it's been a pleasure. It was really fun, Chris.
yep.
So, yeah,
Good. So I think that's good, Esther. What do you say?
I say perfect.